Hey guys, so my spin on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta-analysis that I did a month ago was pretty popular, so I thought I'd make this a recurring series, where based on the top 25 ranked players on Dueling Book, I used ygeoscope.com to find their 20 most recent replays that were publicly available, and outlined what decks they were playing, as well as what the deck's win percentages were, based on whether they won or lost a die roll, and how they fared depending on the deck's playstyle that they went up against. As always, I want to make it clear that I won't be showing the performance of any specific player, as I want to respect their privacy, but rather to show the performance at the deck level. Now, it takes me a lot of time to go through the replays for these kind of videos, so if you enjoy this, then make sure to like the video and subscribe, and let me know how often you think I should do these meta-analysis, because right now, I'm thinking I do this every month. Also guys, at the time of recording this video, I am very close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, so I just want to say thank you very much for helping me grow so fast. I started this channel 4 months ago and really didn't expect much of it, but the channel has been doing really well and I'm excited to continue to grow with you all moving forward. So anyways guys, let's get straight into it. So to do this analysis, I first recorded who the top 25 ranked players on Dueling Book were on a given day. In this instance, it was December 6, 2020, which is after Genesis Impact was legal. Then over the next few days, whenever I had free time, I went through 20 publicly available replays for each of those players and collected the relevant information. Now the reason the total number of matches add up to 496 and not 500 is because some matches concluded before any card was played, which I excluded, and in rare instances, the available replay was for a single game and not for a match, so I excluded that as well because I'm only interested in looking at full matches. Now keep in mind that 496 is still a really small sample size, but unfortunately I just don't have the manpower to go through thousands of replays on my own, so this is the best that we can go with. So based on the 496 matches included, assuming roughly 20 matches attributed to the same player, this was the breakdown of the decks played. Of course, the same player generally tended to play the same deck for all of their matches, although not always. One disclaimer I do want to mention is that this is not necessarily a representation of the decks you would see in a tournament. For example, in my last meta-analysis for November, I saw a ton of Buster Blader decks, but by the time we got to LCS 8, we hardly saw any of that deck being played. So take this breakdown with a grain of salt. So we still see a lot of Virtual World being played, but it is essentially tied with Dragon Link at around 20%, which is still a very popular deck as well. Zodiac coming in at 3rd place at 14% is probably not too surprising, and this includes all variants such as Dogmatica, Eldritch, Dogmatica Eldritch Zoo, as well as even Dogmatica Tri-Brigade Zoo. There actually wasn't a lot of pure builds being run by the players included in this analysis. Dinosaur is still pretty popular of course, but this one wasn't as straightforward as usual because this also included some Dogmatica Dinosaur variant as well, so that was pretty interesting. And coming in at 5th was Drytron, which is the new deck coming out of Genesis Impact, and I know it also has a lot of potential as being one of the top decks, especially with VFD still being legal. I thought I would see a bit more of Drytrons, especially since at the time I did the data collection, it was just after Genesis Impact became legal, but I suppose not. Then you had a myriad of other decks such as Dogmatica Buster Blader, Infernoble Knight, Adamantipator, Burning Abyss Phantom Knight, Prank Kids, and some more in the other category that included decks like Madolche, Salamangreat, and Dogmatica Invoked. Also guys, you'll see the 2 Dogmatica Eldritch images at the bottom right there. What this means is that among all decks, 15.5% of the decks played a Dogmatica engine, and 13% of all decks played an Eldritch engine as well. This is certainly a lot lower than in my last meta-analysis where you saw about 38% of decks played a Dogmatica engine and 28% with an Eldritch engine, mainly because of the large number of play of the Buster Blader deck at the time. So to look at some overall numbers, the top 25 players in our pool won 74% of their matches. I also tried to categorize their deck's playstyle, largely following how El Exordio categorizes the decks. Aggro decks include those like Dragon Link, Virtual World, and Drytron, and control decks involve decks like Zodiac variants and Buster Blader. Now in my last meta-analysis, I also created a category called Aggro Control just to categorize decks like Eldritch Synchro that had aspects of both playstyles, but I didn't see decks like that this time around in my pool of top 25 players, so I don't have that category in this video. Lastly, you have Beatdown, which include decks like Dinosaur and your traditional OTK strategy decks. So now I'd like to bring some deck specific results for the 5 most common decks included in our data collection. So for Virtual World, their overall match win percentage was around 72% based on 101 matches, and if you look at the win percentage based on the die roll result, When they won the die roll, they won about 85% of the matches, whereas when they lost the die roll, they won about 59% of the matches. So a pretty stark difference in win percentage based on the die roll, but at the same time, remember that throughout the video we are dealing with small sample sizes, so take the findings with a grain of salt. While I'm not an expert with Virtual World, I suppose these numbers can make sense, since if they go first, then they set up 1 to 2 VFDs, and that's usually game on its own. And from my analysis of the 23 Virtual World list from LCS 8, they played around 6 hand traps, which isn't a lot, so perhaps it can be hard going second. Now, I also wanted to map out the deck's win percentage based on the playstyle of the deck they faced. Certainly not perfect, and let me know if you think the numbers you see generally seem to make sense or not at all. Anyways, in my data pool at least, it looked like Virtual World had the most success against control decks, where it won 87% of the time, while winning about 66% of the time against aggro decks and only 44% of the time against beatdown decks, although this was only based on 9 matches. So next, let's move on to Dragon Link, which had a really impressive 83% match win percentage, the highest among the decks you'll see in this video. When they won the die roll, it won about 90% of the time among the matches included in my data collection, and still a respectable win percentage of 77 when they lost the die roll. Dragon Link, of course, sets up a couple of negates, a bounce, as well as an extra deck lock, and sometimes even a hand rip through Levineer, so definitely a very formidable deck when going first. The deck can also play a lot of hand traps despite being a going first deck, so I think it's not too surprising that the deck can win at a reasonable rate as well when losing the die roll and most likely going second for game 1. As for their match win percentage against different playstyles, it honestly had a pretty even win percentage of around 81 to 86% against all styles. So if these values are actually true, then clearly Dragon Link is a really versatile deck, although I suppose not that surprising since it has been in the tier 1 status for a while now. Next, we have our first control deck that we are showing on here, which is Zodiac, and for this graphic we are including all of the variants like Dogmatica, Eldritch, and the like. So overall win percentage was around 68%, which is respectable but certainly lower than the Virtual World and Dragon Link decks that we showed just earlier. When they won the die roll, they won about 85% of their matches, whereas they only won about 45% of their matches when they lost the die roll. I would assume that the small sample size is really amplifying this difference, and in reality I don't think the deck would really struggle that hard when losing the die roll. This can get also a little confusing because some Zodiac builds do intentionally go second, so losing the die roll likely doesn't matter for those kind of decks, but the ones included in my analysis, I did notice that they were all going first builds. Nonetheless, Zodiac has seen a lot of resurgence with the release of AA Zeus, and whether they play other engines like Eldritch or Dogmatica or not, it's a deck that can play a lot of powerhouse trap cards like Ice Dragon's Prison and or a lot of hand traps, and also nuke the field with Zeus, which is very easy to get into in this deck. Definitely a really strong but also a very popular deck in the current format. As for their match win percentage based on different playstyles, at least in the data included for this video, they seem to have a great win percentage against other control decks at around 79%, although it didn't seem to do particularly well against aggro and beatdown decks at 57 and 62% respectively. Next, we have Dinosaurs, which is still a really strong deck despite seeing a lot less play in the most recent LCS after winning the one prior to that. With Mist still at 3, you do have to always respect Dinos because otherwise Ultimate Conductor will just eat you up. The deck's overall match win percentage in my data collection showed to be around 71%, and as mentioned earlier in the video, this also included a Dogmatica Dinosaur build, which I would say comprised about 1/5 of the Dino matches included for this video. Now when they won the die roll, they won about 82% of their matches, while when they lost the die roll, it was around 61%. I didn't think there would be much of a difference in win percentage based on die roll because I assume Dino builds are trying to go second anyways, but I did notice that the Dogmatica build, as well as in a few instances the Pure build, also try to go intentionally first for game 1, so perhaps that explains a bit of the difference in win percentage based on die roll in our data collection. As for the win percentage against other playstyles, pretty solid at around 73 to 75% against aggro and control decks, and while the win percentage against beatdown decks was at 50%, this was only based on 6 matches, so I wouldn't put much weight in that value. And finally, we have Drytrons, the new deck from Genesis Impact that perhaps could take the Yu-Gi-Oh meta by storm, just like Virtual World did less than a month ago now. Who knows? As I mentioned at the start of the video, the top players weren't playing a lot of Drytrons, and it had a match win percentage of 67.5 in the data collection for this video. When they won the die roll, they won about 73% of the time, where you would think it would have been a bit higher considering that they set up VFD. And when they lost the die roll, they won about 64% of the time, so still pretty respectable, but again, very small sample size, so interpret the numbers with caution. I don't know too much about this deck myself, but I do know that it is very consistent, and who knows, as long as VFD is still legal, maybe it will surprise us with their performance in the next wave of Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments. In terms of win percentage against different playstyles, of course not many matches to go with, but looks like it had a pretty even distribution in win percentage regardless of playstyle that they went up against, with having slightly more success against control decks. Alright guys, so that's it for my breakdown of the top 25 ranked players on Dueling Book for this current format for December 2020. Hope you enjoyed that. Let me know in the comments if you did, and let me know how frequently you would like to see these kind of meta-analysis. The data collection for this video does take me a really long time, so I want to make sure that I'm providing something worthwhile. Anyways guys, that's it for me. Take care.